Well, good morning. I want to start today with some great news on the COVID-19 front, because good news is always welcome after this long winters of pandemic. And that is the fact that as of today, 91% of Toronto residents now have at least one dose of COVID-19 vaccine. More than 2.5 million Toronto residents have now at least received two doses of vaccine, and this is all thanks to the efforts of Team Toronto. And of course, we continue with our efforts because none of those numbers are a reason to stop, especially in light of the fact that there are some people in our city, in neighborhoods where there is a level of under-vaccination that we haven't been prepared to accept and which we're making every effort to rectify. But we know that people are tired of the pandemic. I'm tired of the pandemic. We're all tired of the pandemic, but that the vaccines represent the best way out of the pandemic. And so we continue with our efforts to vaccinate people. I want to thank the millions of Toronto residents who have stepped forward to receive their vaccinations, first, second, and third doses, and have had their children vaccinated as well. And I want to thank Team Toronto for the work they're doing and to acknowledge that this weekend we have Vax the East going on, a campaign that starts tomorrow with details to be found at toronto.ca. And we hope that people in the east part of the city, but also from across the city, will take advantage of the opening of many different clinics and opportunities to get themselves vaccinated and to encourage others who have as yet not done so to take that step. Today, and I'm very pleased to be joined by my colleague, Councillor Gary Crawford, who is the chair of the Budget Committee, and today the Executive Committee considers the 2022 budget at its annual budget meeting. And I want to begin my remarks today on the budget by thanking Councillor Gary Crawford. I'm not sure if there has been anybody as his predecessor who has ever done the entirety of two budgets through two terms of an administration, but Gary has. And he has brought his balanced, sensible approach, capable and sensible approach to all of those budgets, including one this year, which again has been extremely challenging. If you think about the challenge faced by the budget chief and the mayor and the budget committee and everybody involved, to the staff, of course, in putting a budget together in COVID circumstances, this is the definition of a challenging assignment. This is a good and responsible budget for our city, but it is also a COVID-19 budget, complete with all of the financial realities we are facing thanks to the ongoing pandemic, unprecedented financial realities that we face thanks to COVID-19. Given the progress that we have made in getting residents vaccinated and the declining hospitalization numbers that we are seeing, I am cautiously optimistic that we will continue our progress to full reopening and to full economic recovery, which is an increasing focus of mine as mayor. Our finances will improve as we get Toronto back to work and as we get people back on transit, and as we continue with careful, prudent financial management and solid government partnerships. These matter more than ever now. This is a responsible budget that will ensure that Toronto gets through the end of this pandemic and comes back stronger than ever. This budget, as recommended by the Budget Committee, will continue to deliver the largest COVID-19 vaccination campaign in history, as I have been referring to. It will invest in an emotion-centered care model for our long-term care residents to provide the best care possible for our residents that are in our care. It will hire 62 new frontline paramedics, continuing the city's multi-year staffing initiative for Toronto paramedic services. It will facilitate the lowering of small business taxes by 15%. It will expand sidewalk snow clearing to every neighborhood across the city. And it will restore TTC service to pre-pandemic levels, while at the same time freezing transit fares. That work to ramp up TTC service starts this weekend, with 17 routes seeing increased and restored service. As the budget notes, we have worked to find $1.6 billion in efficiencies, savings, offsets, and other measures over the course of the pandemic, including almost $500 million in this budget for this year, $500 million in savings and efficiencies and offsets to reduce the financial pressure on the city. While it was obviously secondary to saving lives and protecting the health of Torontonians, I have maintained a keen interest, as has Councillor Crawford, on sound, prudent financial management during the course of the pandemic, and I will continue to do so with Councillor Crawford. This has been repeatedly exercised, our sound, prudent financial management, by the city's external credit rating agencies, and in my view has been a significant factor in the maintenance of confidence in the City of Toronto by the financial marketplace, by the other governments, and by the taxpayers that we serve. We've worked throughout this pandemic with the Government of Canada and with the Government of Ontario to protect services, to invest in crucial areas that need it, and to keep costs affordable. We are grateful for the partnership of the other governments, for their financial support, and for their recognition of the fact that cities do not have the legal latitude to deal with an unprecedented revenue shortfall like we've experienced thanks to COVID, especially in the area of transit. As I've made clear many times over and in very direct conversations with the other governments over the course of the last few weeks, that cooperation between and among all governments and urgent support for Toronto and all cities across the Canada and across Ontario must continue, absolutely must continue this year. To protect frontline services and our ongoing recovery, Toronto will need a further $1.4 billion in COVID-19 relief funding from the other orders of government so that we can continue to provide frontline essential services without slashing the city's capital budget or without reducing those services. The slashing of the city's capital budget would jeopardize construction and other kinds of jobs, and it would jeopardize and make more difficult the task of economic recovery. Much of this shortfall that the city has is due to reduced transit revenues due to the pandemic. Reduced ridership produces reduced revenues, which in turn puts us in this position that I'm describing this morning, about $561 million in forecasted lost transit revenues for this year. I will be continuing my advocacy with the other governments to ensure that we protect frontline services and continue to make needed investments in major capital infrastructure projects. Sometimes these capital projects are seen as nice things to have, but in fact, they're essential parts of building a strong Toronto and maintaining a strong Toronto, and an essential part of recovery from the standpoint of both having a city that works and a city that creates those kinds of jobs. As we've learned during the budget process, a $1.4 billion reduction to our capital budget would have a devastating impact. A reduction in capital expenditures and funding intended for capital infrastructure investments would have a serious impact on job growth, with $1.4 billion in reduced capital expected to impact some 12,600 jobs. That's a lot of jobs. That is a negative effect that would hurt the construction industry, among others, and hurt Toronto and Ontario and Canada at precisely the time that we should be looking for every opportunity we can to help those industries, to help the economy, to preserve and create jobs so that we can all get back to work and recover. We need those jobs now. We need those projects now. They are very much a part of building Toronto and Canada back. Many of these projects that would be cut and needed infrastructure upgrades for the good of transit and our environment, we should be making these investments so that we can continue to address climate change, so that we can continue to protect and improve and build back up our infrastructure. This is another goal that all governments share: climate change and sounder infrastructure. And that is why this support from the other governments, delivered in a timely manner, is so important to our city and to its economic future. I'm confident that the other governments will ultimately come through because they understand the pandemic has continued into this year, and because they have understood all the way along the constraints that exist on municipalities to address this kind of unprecedented shortfall. Discussions have been constructive, and the urgency, as determined by the calendar alone, is increasingly recognized. I was pleased to see an acknowledgement on this issue from the province in their fall economic statement. We now need those conversations that we have been having with the federal government to proceed urgently to successfully conclude, so as to ensure that we can stabilize our budget and those of other cities across the country as well, because I can assure you other cities, while not as large as Toronto, are facing the same kind of transit revenue shortfall in the case of the bigger cities in particular. We have worked to communicate clearly to the Government of Canada the severe impacts that a failure on their part to provide continued support would have on our city and on other cities around the country, and the impact this would have on economic recovery. It's never crossed my mind that this federal government won't honor the commitment made during last year's election to keep supporting cities with pandemic relief. I can't imagine they wouldn't want to do everything they can to ensure that Toronto, Canada's economic engine, comes back stronger than ever. And it's hard to contemplate anyone triggering these kinds of job losses and putting off needed climate change initiatives when we know how well earlier financial partnerships during this crisis have worked for all Canadian cities and for Canadians as we dealt with the effects of the pandemic and trying to keep Canadians safe during that pandemic. So I look forward to today's discussions at the Executive Committee and next week at City Council, where I expect the usual discussion and debate, of course, will occur. That's a sign of good health in our civic democracy, and there will, of course, be some changes that are made to the budget during the course of that process. That's how the system works as well. That happens every single year. And so again, with my thanks to Councillor Crawford and to our city staff who work all year on this budget in close concert with Councillor Crawford and myself, I'm happy to open questions you have this morning.
Thank you, Mayor Tory. We will now take questions from the media. As a reminder, it's one question, one follow-up, and then we'll unmute you when it's your turn. First up, we have Jennifer Pagliaro from the Star. Go ahead.
Hi, good morning, Mayor. Good morning, Councillor Crawford. I just wanted to ask, Mayor, you talked a lot about, obviously, this budget gap that we've asked the other governments to come forward with related to COVID. Can you just be more specific when it comes to the federal government? Who are you speaking to? You know, if you have you been able to reach them by phone? You know, often there's this exchange of letters, and it sort of feels like the other governments are sort of putting things off. So just to try to assure Torontonians what's happening and what gives you this confidence that they will do what they've done in the last 2 years.
I have spoken to the Prime Minister in person. When I say in person, at a meeting of big city mayors, I have spoken to him personally one-on-one on the telephone. I've spoken a number of times to the Deputy Prime Minister and Minister of Finance. I have spoken in person with the Minister of Intergovernmental Affairs at a meeting I had in Ottawa. I've spoken with that minister, Mr. de Blanc, a number of times on the telephone. And I've spoken to a broad range of Toronto members of Parliament and ministers. And as I've said, those discussions have been constructive, but they haven't yet reached a conclusion. And I started with these discussions some time ago. And it takes some time because it's an intergovernmental thing involving the province as well. And I'm saying now that there's an urgency to this because obviously we're proceeding forward to approve our budget and it does have a hole in it. And so I'm merely pointing out that we're at the day of decision when it comes to their willingness to help us. And I'm optimistic that they will, but you have to keep talking about this until it actually gets done.
And just on the provincial side, we heard at the last budget committee meeting, you know, for example, the city had hoped that the provincial government would come forward with health-related funding for a successful in-hospital program related to gun violence that the city and other hospitals have contacted us hoping to expand. And it is proven already in some hospital settings. It's not a theoretical program, but I understand that having read it, the letter back from the province was essentially, sorry, we don't have that money for you, and sort of end of story. So I just wonder what your response then to the province is. You know, there's a lot of things that the city pays for in our operating budget that could maybe properly be characterized as a provincial or federal expense when it comes to healthcare or other matters.
I've learned in this job that you just have to keep at this. And so anyone who would have thought, even on a relatively modest amount of money, we're talking small hundreds of thousands of dollars for the BRAVE program, which helps to deal with people who get involved in gun violence and hopefully help them to get on the right track. This is an incredibly valuable and important program. And so it seems relatively modest in the context even of our own $14 billion budget. But even when we got that letter back that seemed to be quite negative, I just picked up the campaign and started back in again, and they're reconsidering that. And I think that's important. And that's the way I conduct the intergovernmental relations on behalf of the city, at least lead in that process. So we're back at that issue. But I think of equal and more importance, just because of the magnitude of it and the number of people it affects, is something like supportive housing, where, you know, as of this moment, we still don't have the confirmation we need of the operating support they have given, admittedly, in previous years. But as we expand our supportive housing operations and offering in order to address homelessness, we need the supports to be in place to help people with mental health and substance and other kinds of issues. And so this is something that I spend a good deal of my time on as mayor. It's my job. I've had probably as much success as any mayor in trying to forge these partnerships, these financial partnerships successfully with other governments on transit, on housing, on a host of things. And I'll keep at it. And I have cautiously optimistic that we will be successful in getting the kind of partnership put together that we need, because I think they understand the importance of these things to the people of the City of Toronto and to our economic and social stability and success.
Thank you. Next up, we have Momin Qureshi. Go ahead, Momin.
Good morning. Thank you for taking my question. I would actually like to ask about something else if I can. Mayor Tory, Premier Ford is set to speak shortly, and it's believed he'll be announcing some sort of emergency powers to be put in place. I just want, in relation to what's happening in Ottawa and potentially what's happening here, I just wanted to know if you've had conversations with the Premier and if you think there is a need for these extra powers to be put in place, given what's going on.
It's difficult for me to speculate in advance of any announcement that he might make. I've seen the speculation, but I will say this. I did speak with the Premier yesterday. We spoke about the protests, among other matters. And I will just say that he's engaged in this. He was interested to hear of the different plans that we're putting in place in Toronto, because I also met with Chief Raymer and his team this morning to review those plans, which they continue to make in a very careful, capable way. And so we'll watch with interest to see what the province does. And, you know, I asked the question during our meeting this morning that if any of those things reflect in any way on our ability to do a better job, a more careful job, a more capable job of making sure we keep Toronto residents safe, then of course we'll have a look at that. But I just don't know what he's going to do, so it's difficult for me to.
Well, do you think that those type of moves are needed, though, just without knowing what they are? I mean, do you think that we do need to take those types of extra steps right now?
Well, I'll say this much. I have said over and over again, and I believe in my heart as a Canadian, in the right to peaceful and respectful protest. And there is a time, though, peaceful and respectful protest turns into something much different than that. It turns into something that, you know, the exercise of one person's rights or the group of people's rights starts to really interfere with other people's rights to go to work or to be safe or to be healthy. And that is a time when you know, you have to do whatever you can to assess people's collective rights and to make sure you respect everybody's rights. It isn't one or the other. So, you know, I think all of us have work to do to make sure that we can keep people safe and keep their rights protected, everybody's, and that's exactly what we're trying to do. And so we'll see what Premier Ford has to say, but we're making our own plans to make sure Torontonians are kept safe and that the city functions. And I credit the police with a really good job done thus far in that task, with us in full support in many different ways.
Okay, checking if Kevin from the Toronto Sun has any questions. Kevin, go ahead. Kevin, can you hear us? Okay, we'll check with David Ryder next. David, do you have any questions?
Yes, thanks. I'll ask Mayor Tory. There's a lot of attention, obviously, on the blockades at the border and concern about effects on automakers and others. I'm wondering, you talked about Toronto's kind of precarious economic situation and trying to come out of the pandemic. Are you concerned about at all about any impacts on the Toronto economy? Are there potential impacts of this kind of action that stops cross-border trade?
The first thing I'm obviously concerned about in looking at these potential protests here or elsewhere, but my responsibility is here, is safety of people and respect for everybody's rights. But that's the point, respect for everybody's rights. People shouldn't have to, because someone is exercising their rights, worry then about their own right to go to work, or their own right to be safe, or their own right to get to the doctors. This is just where, you know, we have to sort of give ourselves a bit of a shake and say, look, it is our responsibility to look after everybody's rights, and it isn't one or the other. And so, yes, I'm concerned about people's right to go to work, and I'm concerned about the impact that some of these demonstrations have on our economy. People need to be at work. They need to support their families. They want to be at work. They want to be able to go to the doctor. They want to be able to live peacefully in Toronto or elsewhere. And so I think you see all kinds of actions being undertaken by police authorities and by other governments, including the one here, to try to make sure that you, yes, respect the rights of people to peaceful, respectful protest, but when it goes beyond that, to take whatever steps are necessary to maintain the peace. This is a country founded on peace, order, and good government. And I think that's those are very important words that we could, you know, be taking a serious look at, as I think we all are just now as we try to move forward. I get the frustration that people have with the pandemic. You know, I've said before, I'm frustrated by it. Councillor Crawford, I'm sure, is frustrated by it. Everybody's frustrated by it. You know, we've all had enough of this. But there's a way to get out of it that I think we're doing in a steady, responsible way, by getting vaccinated, by following public health guidelines, by seeing those restrictions reduced over time as the numbers improve. And yes, sure, you know, have a protest, but say your piece and go home. Don't, you know, interfere with the lives of all kinds of other people who may well agree with you, but who don't want to see their lives interfered with, their ability to earn their living, their ability to go to the doctor, their ability to get to and from where they want to go, or live their lives just in peace and quiet without a lot of horns honking.
Thank you. My follow-up is on a different subject, on housing. through ministerial zoning orders, the Ford government has used them extensively to override and kind of give a veto on what should happen on different sites. In Willowdale, we now seem to have a situation where one provincial Conservative MPP, Stan Cho, has a veto over the city's approved modular housing project, and we've seen pictures of the housing sort of sitting in a parking lot. Have you talked to either Mr. Cho or the Premier about that, and what do you think about that situation?
I've talked to both Mr. Cho and the Premier about this and indicated of our very firm resolve to move forward with that very excellent and well thought through housing development to provide supportive housing to people who are presently experiencing homelessness. I have gone across the city to public meeting after public meeting in ward after ward, supporting these projects, explaining them to the public in terms of what they are and what they're not, and helping them to move forward. And they all have, with the exception of this one. And I've indicated our firm resolve to move it forward one way or another. And they both understood very clearly what my point of view was. And I have said I will meet with Mr. Cho, but in agreeing to meet him, I made it very clear that we were proceeding with this because we think it is the right thing to do for the city, and that we've done it in a careful and thoughtful manner. We've had plenty of consultation, including extra consultation they asked us to have. We did exactly what they wanted. And we understand the obligation we have, with the support of other governments, to provide supportive housing to people experiencing homelessness. This kind of housing represents the best single answer that we have for the people who end up sleeping outside in encampments. It is housing. It's a real home. I've been to them. I've seen them. They're funded by the federal government and by the very same operating supports that I made reference to earlier from the provincial government. And they represent a real home. And sometimes for the first time in a long time for these people, with the supports they need to get themselves back on their feet. It's exactly what we want to do. Help people who are experiencing homelessness to get back on their own feet, to be in a position where we can then help them get a job, help them deal with some of the issues in their lives. But it starts with the housing. What kind of a situation is it where we've ordered the modular units, we're ready to put them in, we're ready to house homeless people, and can't? You know, we're going to move forward. We're not going to be stopped from doing this, but I'd like to do it in a way that is consensual and that can, you know, sort out whatever issues that there are. But there does come a time when you have to move forward, and we're there.
Thank you. And we'll check Kevin one more time. Kevin, do you have a question? Kevin? Okay. That's it for today, everybody. Thank you and have a great weekend.